He's the most prolific African-American scholar with more than 100 books and 500. George Washington's Summer White House, Uncle Bobby's Coffee and Bookshop, and the Lest We Forget Museum in an area of Philadelphia that was the home of Bambara, Sonia Sanchez, Bobby Seale, David Richardson, Reverend Jeremiah Wright, Ife Niowu, and numerous other musicians, artists, and Pan-African leaders. Conceived as a library and community meeting place, the MKA Institute has become a think tank where scholars meet, debate, and discuss critical ideas related to the African diaspora. The MKA Institute is dedicated to three overarching visions: research excellence, education centeredness, and culture exhibition. Research. Our aim is to report the work of the best scholars to the members of our community. The Institute has a library of thousands of books collected over several decades. A number of outstanding scholars serve as fellows to the Institute. Education. We hold classes, courses, conferences, and symposia to advance knowledge, advocate solutions, and provide strategies for dealing with political, social, and cultural issues. Teaching Sikam and other African languages. The MKA Institute is an active participant in community education. Culture. We are a historical, social, and cultural institution showcasing and exhibiting the artistic and literary talents of African people. Artists such as Ife Niowu, Whitson Hunter, Richard Wyatt, and Abdias Nascimento are among our permanent collection. The MKA Institute has hosted many outstanding speakers. Committed to an Afrocentric vision, the MKA Institute is a nonprofit 501c3 organization seeking to improve its community, revitalize the neighborhood, and celebrate our youth in the tradition of Malefi Kete Asante. Welcome.
I want to announce that on March the 30th, our next presentation will be on March the 30th. And I will be talking about the debate over Kemet regarding the Arabs and the Europeans and the Africans. And I will be having that conversation. That conversation always brings a number of people from all over the world to engage with us. And so I'm looking forward to this engagement. And so we'll have a wonderful presentation then. On April the 12th, Dr. Hadi Dida, who is actually the head of social work at the Westchester University. He will be here. Hadi Dida is a Ghanaian who has been in mental health services in Delaware and other places. He's an outstanding intellectual and scholar. We're bringing him here on April the 13th. April the 13th. So those two dates, March the 30th, Dr. Asante on the debate of the Arabs and the Europeans regarding Kemet and the Nile Valley complex. And then on April the 13th, Dr. Hadi Dida, and that's going to be mental health and urban America. That's a wonderful, brother, wonderful presentation. I just want to also announce, as you saw the video that was made by the director, Anna Yaninga, she also is an organizer of this center, this Malefikati Asante Institute, in the sense that it was her idea that we should have this institute. And this is the 13th year. And most people don't realize that. This institution has been in existence for 13 years. And in 13 years, it has basically been an organization supported by the African community. It is an organization that we have always said that We are unbought and unbossed. We are basically an organization that is not for profit, but we have people who support us. And we have a board that is extremely supportive of this organization. And we cannot thank them enough. This is really one of the great achievements. This whole project has nothing to do with any funding from any federal government or anything. This is our organization. We say what we say, and we do what we do here. So this is really, really an amazing thing for 13 years. So we're actually celebrating the 13th anniversary. I just want to make a couple of comments.
So that's today.
That's today, the anniversary. This is the anniversary. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I just want to make a couple of comments, and then I'll introduce our distinguished speaker. The first comment I want to make, and I want to make this comment simply because I have traveled throughout the country, and I see the great despair that a lot of people have. But one of the things that I want you to know is that you cannot elect a felon and then expect compassion. Let me say that again. You cannot elect a felon and then expect compassion. There's so many people who are really crying. I've talked to people, some people who are in Georgia, other people in other parts of the country who did not think that they would lose their jobs. They said, I voted for Trump and I lost my job, right? And they're crying, and they're trying to say that somehow he lied to them. But if you elect somebody who has 34 counts against him and he was found guilty on them, and then you put him in office, what can you expect? You cannot expect anything good to come out of something that's bad like that. And I think that that's part of the problem with our thinking as African people sometimes, is that we don't realize that we are really in charge of our own decisions. Like, for example, people are talking about, well, we can't use woke no more. We can't use diversity no more. You can use anything you want to use. It's up to you. It's not up to him whether you talk about diversity or equity or inclusion. I mean, that's up to us. And nobody can stop you from using a term that you want to use. And nobody should be worried about not doing what you think is right. Because part of what happens in governments that operate on the basis of terror is that they try to subdue people and keep people from talking simply by threatening them. And of course, our history, of course, is long in this country. We have been threatened. We know basically how it works in the United States of America since the beginning of the country, the genocide of the native peoples, the enslavement of the Africans, and the dispossession of the Mexicans. We know this place. We've been here a long time. So let's understand that. Let's understand that Trump, in many ways, is just a reordering of Andrew Jackson. And you remember who Andrew Jackson was. He was called the Indian Killer. That was that's one of the presidents of the United States of America. His title was the Indian Killer because he killed so many Native Americans. And he was the one who carried out the Trail of Tears. And the way they peopled the state of Florida was the people who fought with Andrew Jackson against the Seminole people said that if you kill a Native American and you bring the ears of a Native American, you get 162 acres of land. That's how the white people peopled Florida. That's how that Florida became a state, because the settlers killed native people, and then they took over their land. So we give praise to the Lenape people whose land we stand on today here in the state Commonwealth that they call Pennsylvania. So Trump may be the end of the American empire, but he is also the beginning of tyranny. And what that means to us, I think, as African people, that we have to understand that this is the rise of the oligarchs. And oligarchs, these are the billionaires. They used to talk in the old days about tycoons, people who had so much money that as they went, so did the country. Well, this is basically what the oligarchs are trying to do. The oligarchs are trying to do something that they have in some of the other countries, like in Brazil, for example, or Colombia, where you have commissions that are given to rich people who basically own all the sectors of society. There's some people who just own all steel mills. Some people own the agriculture, the growing of corn. Some people own the shipping industry, you see. Some people own other aspects of the society, transportation. And in this country right now, what we oppose for is that the oligarchs are trying to buy all the institutions of America. This is what we call state capture. In other words, they want to capture the entire state, the entire nation. To capture the nation, that means that the post office is up for sale. Whatever billionaire can buy it will buy the post office. And they will probably try to do that with all the other agencies of government. If you want to own the CDC, then maybe there's a private individual who is rich enough who will buy the CDC and run the CDC. Everything is up for sale. It's neoliberalism gone to hell. So that's where we are now. And I think one of the things that we have to really be concerned about as African people is that we have to support each other. And I want to thank Brother Edgar Ridley for telling me this morning. He woke up this morning, and unfortunately he was in the hospital, but he said, Molefi, I want to let you know that one of the things that we have to do is always to support each other. That we cannot be, and I would just want to say this, say to my brothers and sisters who are listening, even and on the continent, we cannot be beggar people. That is the worst thing, because what happens is Europe sees that as an indication of inferiority. We are not those people. And we will never enjoy our independence and our freedom so long as we beg other people for anything. Don't beg anybody for anything. Be like Malcolm. Stand on your own feet. Work for your own interest. And then if you do that, you'll clean up your neighborhoods, you'll clean up your families, you'll have a different attitude toward everything. This is what we have to do. So it's important. They want to settle everything on the backs of the masses, but we are the masses, and we are the vanguard of the masses. And as vanguards of the masses, we have to be clear, we have to learn, we have to study, and we have to be very, very clear about our history and our culture. I am so happy today because we have, in my judgment, one of the greatest scholars living among us today. He is an incredible interpreter of our ancient history. He's written two important books, and he's written over 40 different articles. And this is just an incredible scholar. He has written People's History of Guyana. He was born in Guyana, the country, South American country of Guyana. Most people have never heard of it, but they have heard of Ivan van Sertima. They may not have heard of it, but they have heard of the great scholar of the stolen legacy, You know, they all these scholars that this country has produced, Guyana, this little country produced all these scholars. And when I met this brother, I looked at him, brother, you from Guyana, man. They produce some incredible scholars in that country. This gentleman, Dr. Kimani Nehusi, who has his PhD from the University of London. He's taught in Africa. He's taught in Europe. He's been at Temple for several years. He is, in my judgment, if we look at all of the departments of Africana Studies and Africology, I can't imagine. I sometimes say he's in the top 3, but I can't think of who the other 2 are. So in terms of chematology, and I said, well, who else at what other university? Who do they have at Harvard? Who do they have at Penn? Who do they have at USC? I can't think of who. Nobody. Kimani Nehusi. He's written the main book on libation. The main book on libation from the ancient time. This brother is a serious thinker. And when I say serious thinker, like yesterday when we were talking with the Ritleys, and the Ritleys were talking about symptomatic thinking rather than symbolic thinking, this brother he knows the whole symptoms, and he understands what we're doing and how we have to do this. So I'm honored. I'm also honored. I want to just mention that my son is in the audience, in the back here. My stepson is Mario Root. We've enjoyed him for 2 days because yesterday was his first day. He's been here before, but being here in the presence of the activities that we had yesterday, the full conference symposium on Edgar Ridley. So today he's going to be in for another treat, just like you and me. We're going to be in a treat with Dr. Kimani Nehusi, our incredible scholar, and who is come to us to talk about classical Africa, foundations for an Afro future imaginary. All right, thank you.
Let me start by recording my great appreciation for this invitation and also for you as part of our circle helping to make this moment. After the introduction that I've had, I hope that I could step up to the plate.
You got it, brother.
I'm supposed to talk about the classical Africa as foundation for an Afro future imaginary. And I think that it's an extremely important thing to do, to imagine our future. We have to imagine our future. If we don't, other people will impose their ideas of the future upon us.
That's right.
And I'm going to say some other things, of course, about this as we go on. But I just want to emphasize for us that we're using the Afrocentric methodology. We have to locate ourselves in our entire history and culture, as Dr. Santi has written and explained. And this is of absolute importance. But too often, we don't know our own story. And because we tend not to know the earlier chapters of ourselves, we place ourselves in the unenviable position of someone who is reading a novel of, let's say, 20 chapters, but we want to start at chapter 18 or 19 and imagine that we understand their entire story. 19 and imagine that we understand their entire story. So this is the critical importance of beginning our story at its beginnings. We do not at the moment have full grasp of some of the earliest aspects of ourselves. But we have Kemet, increasingly repossessing Kemet. And therefore, I'm going to say something about Kemet as I go along. But let me just say that we have to recite ourselves in our entire history and our culture. Once we get that right, we're going to be amazed about how many other things we could see in a flash. So I want to start by inviting us to remember the future. Remember the future.
Yes, sir.
The answers to our challenges were there all the time in our past. But we just don't know or know enough about our past. The sages of Mali warned us the future springs from the past, but it grows through the present. And it's what we do with our lives in the now that will have great bearing upon what we know and therefore what we could imagine about our future. And once we could imagine something that is substantial and achievable, all we have to do is organize and work towards it. We're going to talk some more about that as we go along. I want also to just tell us some of the things that I understand by the major terms in the lecture. And I think classical is very important. We have to understand the tremendous anteriority of ourselves, of Africa, and the meaning of that and the implications of it. Let me say something else. We have become accustomed to talking about classical literature, classical music, and so on. And what we're actually doing is talking about the classical forms of the people who oppress us.
That's right.
So oppressed have we become that we use these words and many other words easily. So we worship the standards of our oppressors, and we don't know our own standards too often. This is the ridiculous situation we are in. And I think it's important for us to challenge ourselves and make certain that we understand these issues. So one of the things I want to point out, we can't go into depth about the models and the forms of classical Africa. I'm going to mention some, but we need to have a series of discussions on these. But let me just say to us that we should reflect on this. Humanity was born black in Africa under a tropical sky. What's the implication of this? The archetypes, the first models of humanity were African. Now, this is a tremendous significance. And not only that, the first civilizations, please note the plural, the first civilizations in the world were African.
That's right.
That's right.
And they weren't all of that different from each other.
That's right.
Africa led the world for thousands of years. We have been in this world as independent, self-determining people for far long, many times longer than we have been in this maafa, in the oppression here in the United States and elsewhere.
That's right.
That's something.
That's right.
And our people have led the world for thousands of years. One of our societies, our civilizations, Kemet, ancient Egypt, by a very conservative estimate, led the world for 3,000 years. The empire that's currently cracking up, not with laughter. It's one of Western European empires that has oppressed the world for 500-600 years. There just comes. So I hope that when we talk about the anteriority, that's Sheikh Diop's term, of Africa, we understand the profundity of the concepts and the achievement that we're dealing with. So the archetypes of humanity are African. The basis of African civilization that bloomed at different parts of the continent and even outside the continent, these are all African. Nubia, Kush, Kemet, Axum, Ghana, Mali, Songhai, Kanem, Bornu, and others, Benin. You know, we could spend a year easily talking about the tremendous achievement or achievements of each one of these places. For example, Benin, they built a wall that is the greatest construction in humanity. It could go around continental United States at least 3 times. We don't know about that. You know, bigger than the Great Wall of China. So one of the things we need to keep asking ourselves is how come we don't know enough about ourselves? And that should challenge us to do that. So my point here is that the models and the standards of humanity are really African, or have been African for the longest while. Other people have deviated, and you might accuse them, and I think correctly, of deviant behavior because they deviated from the human standards set by our ancestors. And it's for us to retrieve those standards and begin to live them again. That's one of the things I mean when I say, remember the future. Yes, sir. So we have to understand also the foundation in these models and standards that our people achieved. For example, in traditional African society, classical African society, people who were successful gave back to their communities. That's right. And we could go on and on and on and on. Right. People modeled their individual behavior on something you know, which is kind of imitation, the 10 Commandments, which are abbreviations of the declarations of innocence by our people. I just want to mention and connect with some things that we know. Now, this wasn't something that people, you know, go to church every Sunday. This is something that people lived by every day. I'm not saying that everybody achieved it 100% of the time, but my sense is that this was the standard in our communities. Yes, and you go through Africa today, and if you're not dealing with people who call themselves developed, you're going to find that people are not individualistic, they don't steal, and you know, they honor these things that is part of the life. They won't tell you about some of these things, these scholarly things, well, not only scholarly things that usually only found in books today, regrettably. So that was some of the foundation, the classical foundation of Africa. And our term imaginary is important. I mentioned something about it just now. We have to imagine our future. And when we talk about an imaginary, we mean a concept, something that we want to work towards realizing at a point in the future. It is extremely important that we get this one right. Let me just say that one of the things I hope we're going to understand, if we didn't, I think most people understand it, is that we have been living an exemplary standard or a group of standards for the longest while, and then other people entered our lives. The maafa, the Arab invasion and destruction of Africa, followed by the European invasion and destruction of Africa. That's what I call the maafa, the great destruction. They have entered our lives and disrupted the speed and the profundity of our development. They have introduced selfishness, greed, mass murder, rape, and many of the nasty things, the most unhuman things we could think about that infect our communities and our ancestral continent too often today. That's at their doorstep. We have to take responsibility for our future. And we take responsibility for our future by beginning to realize that for thousands of years we lived certain standards that those people have deviated from and have encouraged us and confused us to such an extent that most of us don't know those standards today. My thesis is that we have spent thousands of years proving that those are the best standards for us, and we will be foolish to desert those standards now. The proof is in our misery. We do not need to try to imitate our oppressors, mass murderers. You know, so when I say remember the future, I'm saying that our future is anchored in our past. The answer was in the past all the time. So if we wish to change our circumstances, our reality, we have to begin by willing to change ourselves. And changing ourselves in the best way must mean that we are informed by the tremendous history our people have. We have to come to know our ancestors, to uphold them, to understand them, to reconnect with them, because our ancestors are the earliest representations of ourselves. So if we forget our ancestors, we damage ourselves because we do not stand on our own foundation. And the future we're imagining, or we challenging ourselves to imagine, could only be an Afro future. A future that is organized around our people's interests, our people's culture, and the knowledge and remembrance of our people's history. So we talked about the methodology. Dr. Santi mentioned a bit about the international situation, the condition in the world in which we find ourselves today. And I think I should say that because of the way in which a multipolar world is developing, Africa and African people outside of Africa have a greater chance of becoming what we need to become. Yes, sir. Do we recognize this moment? Yes, yes. Do we recognize what we need to do and to become? So this addresses part, in my estimation, of the significance of what I've been asked to talk to us today. So, you know, the whole idea of the classical Africa as a standard, a model for the future, invites the comparisons that I've made in passing. Who were we? What did we used to be? We're going to come back to a bit more of that. What have we become? We've become, many of us are orphans of our oppressors. You know, we spend our lives trying to imitate the people who oppress us. Therefore, we don't create, or we seldom create. If you're imitating somebody else, you can't create anything. You could only create when you stand on your own 2 feet. Right. Absolutely. So, you know, I mean, the ramifications of this we could talk about. And then our future. You know, we have to come out of the maafa. The maafa has destroyed us. It has taught us negative values. and with negative values, you cannot achieve anything. I'm saying that we have enough evidence in our lives over the past 600 or so years to tell us that if we attempt to remain in the nonsense that has been imposed upon us, then we have no decent future. We will continue to murder each other. We will continue to betray our ancestors. We will continue to betray the mission of each of our generations. We'll be nothing, because we'll walk through history or be dragged through history, not as ourselves, but as people who are trying to become the pale imitators of those who've committed the greatest crimes in history against humanity. Is that the model we want? This debate, this question, raises the fundamental issue of who is an African. Now, some years ago, I got into a debate with somebody who was the president of one of the largest countries in Africa. And the guy was saying, in effect, that an African is somebody who lives in Africa. Now, it's that ridiculous. So what he was in effect saying, that the thieves, mass murderers, and so on, who descended upon Africa, who live on stolen African land today, who never wanted to do anything with Africa. They curse you and murder you if, before the so-called end of apartheid, you had even suggested to them that they were Africans. But it's become politically good for them, or in their thinking, that some of them are now saying they're Africans. So they're Africans. On the other hand, those of us who live here or outside of the continent are not Africans. The guy has confused citizenship with identity. And I think it's important that we emphasize the critical significance of identity. In Africology, when we talk about relocating ourselves in our culture, we're talking about identity. We're talking about recognizing ourselves as African people in history and in the now and in the future. That's why the future for us has got to be an Afro future. Again, it's a large component of what we need to touch upon, and I'm going to move away from that, but of course, questions are welcome on that. Now, Patricia Lumumba said something that I think is necessary for us to recite here. Despite the boundaries that separate us, despite our ethnic differences, and ethnic here means kind of regional variations, we have the same conscience, the same soul plunged day and night in anguish, the same wish to make the African continent a free and happy continent that has rid itself of unrest and of fear of any sort of colonialist domination. He might have mentioned the diaspora, but you get the drift. Cheikh Anta Diop said something very similar, and he talks about the fact that we have a common bond that extends even before Kemet. And I think it's important to emphasize that point. I hope I made it before, but I was repeating Diop without remembering that. And he says it's an historic bond that unites us and makes the difference. We've got to rediscover those bonds. We've got to know what they are, properly and accurately identify our interests. We might think that this thing we do is in our interest, but it's not. How could we know what our interests are when we don't know who we are? So this is extremely important. And the last word I have here is this. It's logical. Africans were Africans become. Therefore, the new African must be the people to build the new Africa. Of course, it's going to be a process. And what we're talking about here is part of that process. Imagining the future based upon an adequate understanding of the past. So, what Sheikh Anta Diop and Patrice Lumumba and many others of our leaders, intellectual and political and so on, what they're talking about boils down to this, as Marcus Garvey said, one people, one aim, one destiny. We have the same origin. Let's think about it. The first human beings were African. Mm-hmm. And today, we have the same culture. We apply them, we live them. The cultural principles might be different. But if we really look at ourselves, we will be surprised how similar we are as African people. But we have been taught not to see ourselves. And therefore, it doesn't matter how much we look, we will never see the tremendous similarities and continuities that run through us. Again, we could speak at great length about this. I mean, our brothers and sisters in Haiti crushed 5 European armies. This is a tremendous and mind-boggling achievement. Mm-hmm. But even before we get there, our oppressors terrorized and kidnapped us from different parts of the continent. And they made certain to put Africans from different parts of the continent together in the belief that if they separate us, we will become ineffective.
That's right. That's right.
You see where I'm going?
Yes.
And this happened throughout the enslaved diaspora.
That's right.
Africans from different parts of the continent, in the twinkling of an eye, combined to form very effective communities. So, was this magic? Yes, it was. It was African magic. But what was the basis of this magic? what was the basis of this? It's our similarity in culture. You know, and this is not the first time this happened. When our ancestors migrated generally in a northerly direction in the Happy Valley, meaning the Nile Valley, Africans from different parts of the continent got together in Kemet, in Nubia. You know the results of that. So we are not as different as we have been led to believe by our enemies. And if we know that history of combining without losing ethnic identity, you know, somebody come from this place and they name the baby on the 7th day, and another group of people name the baby on the 8th day, and we've been taught to believe that, yeah, that makes you so different. I mean, you know. Right? So we need to understand that we have the same history, culture. We have the same political aims and the same economic also. You know? Again, we can't flesh out all of these, but I just want to put that at the step of our thoughts. So one of the things we have to set about doing is repairing the damage of the maafa. Yes, sir. Yes. We have to understand what happened to us. Yes, we have to understand where we're coming from. And we have to understand where we need to go and how we need to get there. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So let us remember that what we're talking about, the history that shaped us, the sociological plantation processes that implanted disorder, dysfunction, violence into us, these have implications for human resource development. Yes. It doesn't matter where we are, or what we're trying to do or how we're trying to do it. Once we're talking about development, we're talking about people. We're talking about development, we're talking about people. So how are you going to develop families and communities and countries with people who are confused about themselves? With people who don't have common objectives? With people who don't know?
I don't understand.
Well, I do. So all I'm saying, all I'm saying is that you have to understand that development is about people, right? And therefore, the question of what quality of people we're talking about. Are they conscious? Are they oriented properly? Are they motivated? Are they organized? Are they mobilized? If we don't have people with these attributes, then we don't have a proper future. So when we meet in places like these, in spaces like these, and we educate ourselves about our past, we are actually erecting part of the foundation for a beautiful future. So let us remember our future. So let us remember the consequences of self-ignorance and the tremendous importance of self-knowledge. When we recover our knowledge of self, we're laying the foundation for a secure future. So, ma'at is a concept that most of us will be familiar with. It means generally truth, righteousness, blah, blah, blah. I hope I don't have to explain that. This is part of the sameness of culture that you're going to find throughout Africa. The Mbuti people who were before Kemet, they had something called Ikemi and Akami. Do you know that this is exactly translated as Ma'at and Isfet? Ikemi means truth, righteousness, blah, blah, blah. Akami means disorder, chaos. Even down to the question of, in ancient Egyptian, there's tef, which means meaningless noise, blah, blah, blah. You have the same thing among the Mbuti people. Now, I am too ignorant about that part of our history to speak with any degree of authority on it. But that aspect of it captured my attention. And like I said, we generally don't know enough about Africa before Kemet. And we need to understand that it extends beyond Kemet. So we know Ma'at and Isfet and Kemet, but we have Ubuntu. In Southern Africa, it means the same thing. You know, you might have a little difference here and a little difference there, but it's the same thing. You know, Harambe, Ujima, when we talk about Kwanzaa and those principles, same thing. You could go to Yoruba and you have Iwapeli. You know, and this doesn't exhaust the list of similar moral systems in Africa. And again, it's of the great importance that we understand this. I mean, this is just a smattering. So, Maulana Karenga, our tremendous elder brother, has written an extremely important text on Ma'at, the moral ideal in ancient Egypt. And I've stolen a bit of his title here. And I'm saying Ma'at and the moral ideal in Africa, because we have the same, you know. So the ethical statements of African morality are to be found all over Africa.
That's right.
Everybody hasn't formalized them in a list of statements. But you could have the declarations of innocence, we know that. You know, the Zulu declarations of who we are, the Nguzo Saba in Kwanzaa, you know. And I'm certain there are many others, but I just wish to put that out there.
Excellent.
And tell us that for African people, character is always important. You know, who you are, how you behave, and your or our individual behaviors, how we conduct ourselves, is a statement of not only who we are, but of how we achieve the moral ideals in our society. In other words, our ethical behaviors amount to the performance indicators of the achievements of the moral ideals in our society. So if respect for the age is a moral ideal, well, some people do it by tipping the hat, some people genuflect, you do different things.
That's right.
But you all contribute to the same ideal, moral ideal. The extent to which individuals in a society consistently behave in ways that indicate the achievement of the moral ideals in the society is the extent to which that society achieves its moral ideal, which is moral. It doesn't surprise me, and I hope it doesn't surprise you, that in Kemet, there are terms that mean the male owner of character. That's the literal translation. This man owns good character. This woman owns good character. In other words, they're people of good character. And by the way, the ancient Egyptian language has a large number of terms that mean good character. And that in itself should tell us something. You know, how important it was to them. And this is so from the earliest time to the latest time. So when Kemet is about to end, they have, the language became a bit different. But even so, the word for character remained almost identical in its writing to what it was 5,000 and more years before. Now this is tremendous. And you go throughout Africa, and African people are always concerned with good character. Sometimes they say good manners, good behavior. It means the same thing. Getting the sense that we do not have time to go into details about this, but all of Africa, it's the same thing. In the diaspora, it's the same thing. Okay? So, social behavior, manners, good character, that's the indicator that we're talking about. Our people always knew knowledge as something that's almost sacred and should be in service of humanity. We also recognize it as a strategic resource that people who couldn't understand the use of certain bits of knowledge should not get them. You know, and you recognize that. You have that information, or perhaps we always don't recognize we have the information. Because this whole idea of grades, grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, our people invented that. The only place you see that is in Kemet. And our people understood that the arrangement that is today reflected in Bloom's taxonomy in the cognitive domain, where the easiest intellectual activities come first, like remembering. That's why in the young children, you have them reciting something over and over, right? We don't want to go too much into that. But again, our people understood these things about knowledge. And we could talk about that on end. Knowledge was open source in a certain sense. And that's important. And because today, certain people, greed and selfishness predominates. So that during the COVID crisis, there were countries in Africa and India and other parts of the world that were prevented from producing vaccines for their people to save lives because people in this country, Western European countries, weren't going to make a profit about it. But that behavior shouldn't surprise us. They have always put profit above people.
That's right.
How else do you explain enslavement?
That's right.
Yeah. So we understand, or we ought to understand, the patterns of development, of behavior in these people. For generations, they have actively prevented African development. Let me say this. They have actively prevented African development for generations. And that genie is coming out of the bottle right now because the Chinese and the Russians are helping African people to do things that the West prevented.
That's right.
Look at Kwame Nkrumah. When he published Neocolonialism, the last stage of imperialism, the CIA got incandescent with rage. How dare you people our cards? How dare you know what we're doing? How dare you understand how we're trying to harm your people? And you know who they recruited? They recruited some Afro-Saxons from Ghana to overthrow him.
That's right.
Nkrumah had established lots of factories and so on, research institutes. They smashed all of them. Burnt his books. The issue I wanted to talk about in Nkrumah is Akasambo Dam.
Yes.
He had the plan for this big hydroelectric dam. He went to the usual suspects for a loan. They refused him.
That's right.
The Russians gave him the loan. The thing is still working today.
That's right.
Let's think about that and remember that. And every time you hear about a big developmental effort in any part of Africa, it happens in other parts of the world, but we're concerned with Africa here. The usual suspects come out and tell you about 1 million reasons why you should not build it.
You can't do it.
And they never, ever applied that reason to the building of the Boulder Dam, and this dam and that other dam in their own countries.
That's right.
So it's always bad for somebody else, but good for you. Let us understand these aspects of our past. So I want to quickly point out these things as I'm bringing this to an end, because I know you're anxious to ask your 1 million questions. Our people have always been spiritual. And we need to have a conversation about the collective unconscious, racial memory, whatsoever. We need to put our spirituality back in the central place that it has occupied for the longest part of our history. And we have the aid of many of our practitioners in that area of the mind. So again, we need to do that. Environmentalism. The first environmentalists in the world were African people. Don't allow it to astonish you. It's a fact. Our people lived environmentalism each day. Somebody tells you his name or his family name or his clan name translates as tortoise in English. What does that mean? His people doesn't kill the tortoise, doesn't eat the tortoise in their village and its environs. In the next village, the totem is another animal, and so on and so on. A patchwork of species protection and preservation spread itself across the land. No gun and no fence. On top of that were sacred groves. So animal life and plant life were protected. And before you went on the hunt, if you were a hunter, you had to say special prayers, pour libation, and tell the particular divinity, the God concerned, that you're only going to take from nature what you needed for you and your family. The relation between humanity and the environment was regulated by need, not by greed. Later on, certain people come and started introducing big game hunting. You're going to murder animals for sport. And when you turn on the television today, and they're talking about environmentalism in Africa, it's the usual suspects who are center stage. I am not. And you see Africans in the background. So it doesn't matter which aspect of reality we look at. Let us remember that African people were governed by humanist principles. And I can't leave this without mentioning gender relations, where men and women were equal. We lived under a system called matriarchy, not because women ruled men, but because that is the indicator of equity. Again, it's a question we need to ventilate at this venue. So let me just recall what I said, or I hope I did, that the African record of humanity is a human one. For the greatest part of the life of humanity, we were at the forefront, the examples. We who gave to humanity its humanity have always tried to retain our humanity. Other people deviated. And it's important that we recognize that we have more than enough evidence to understand that we must no longer be mesmerized by the deviant behavior
in the minds of African people. And we are just really, really, really proud of him. So we're going to our associate director, Dr. Jabali Ade, will be conducting the questions. So your first question will be from Ransom. All right. Thank you.
Hotep. I was in full agreement with you when you were talking about the spirit, the spirituality. And Judaism and Christianity has destroyed or genocided a lot of indigenous African culture. That coupled with the colonial destruction and now neocolonialism. I was an active member of a African-centered spiritual community or society for 5 years. The leader of that society was received in Ghana, and he was installed, and I think they gave him 200 acres of land. And then very shortly after that, the Oba of the Yoruba did the same thing. When he went to Nigeria, he was escorted to the original shrines of the Orisha. He said it broke his heart that all but one of these shrines were grossly neglected. Grossly. This one shrine that he brought him to was absolutely beautiful. And so he was happy until he was told why. It was a white German woman, wealthy, that had restored that shrine. Then he talked about how during the slave era, the you had the orisha of your family. And so the ritual practices and the secrets of that orisha were held by those families. During the slave era, there were so many Yorubas that were taken and scattered all over the diaspora that there is literally African culture that is thriving in little pockets in the diaspora that doesn't even exist anymore on the continent. So now the question, I had to frame this. The question is, how can we decolonize the African mind or spirit? Now, that troubles me so bad. That's the question.
Thanks, Brother Ransom. How do we colonize the African mind or spirit? There is no one answer to that. Decolonization is going to be a lengthy process. Hopefully, we're going to provide more and more spaces to make it intensive, so that the intensity will help to correct those learned behaviors that are destructive. And we will restore. But then the dynamics of civilization step in. And part of my experience is that there are brothers and sisters who held on to certain aspects of our culture and relocated them into European garments. You know what I'm talking about. Some people call it syncretism. But I disagree with that term, because our people were consciously electing to camouflage ourselves, our divinities in European garments, because that was the best way out at that moment. They made a tactical choice. In my estimation, calling that syncretism surrenders our people's not only identity, but agency. And therefore, it's an insult to those ancestors who devised that plan, independently of each other, but throughout the Americas, and not only in what we will seek to call spirituality or religion, but in many other aspects. So I think that ways of continuing are important. We need to look at what has been done, what has been achieved. But we also need to recognize the opportunities offered by changes in our situation. And I mentioned the question of my experience because some brothers and sisters told me that they're not going to change preaching Africa in European garments and be plain, simple, and straightforward about being Africa, because it's so they get it. Now, this warns us about the importance of knowing our history. Because if they understood that history, they would recognize that relocating an Orisha as St. Paul is a temporary measure. The best they could do to continue in the context of cultural genocide that Europeans were practicing. So I would say there is no one fix. We have to continue researching, teaching, debating. I think also that increasingly we've got to recognize that opportunities offered by Africology departments, whether or not they become limited or more limited, must be supplemented by real research programs in Africology departments, as well as the departments of history and whatnot on the continent of Africa. That's right. And that is going to be a significant part of our decolonization. When we have research programs that are targeted at answering the questions asked in our communities by our experiences.
So, next question. Yeah, great talk, brother. Really enjoyed it. We learned a lot today. To the best of your knowledge, where did the original Kemetans come from? We know they settled in the Nile Valley, but where did they come from in part of Africa?
Thanks, brother. That's a beautiful question. My short answer is that they came from Africa. Everybody knows that. So let's drill down some more. They came from the birthplace of Africa. Let's drill down some more. Some people say that the first human beings evolved somewhere in East Africa, in the area of Ethiopia today. I haven't seen anything that enables me to resist that. We don't have the most finite of knowledge, but we know that African people from Kemet kept saying, "We from the South," and the South was sacred to them. Also, they had very great reverence, and this was all over Africa, for what I call the ancestral land ritual, where they ritually buried the ancestral land complex, where they ritually buried the navel string, the placenta, and dead bodies in the land. And that made the land, that process, made the land ancestral land because it becomes sacred. Go all over Africa, you're going to find this, right? Now, one of the earliest examples of that we find way outside of Kemet, but to the south. So again, it points there. There are certain words in the language of ancient Egypt that tell us this. The way in which they wrote the names of peoples from West today, Somalia, from different peoples. They wrote these words in such a way as to tell themselves, and it was natural for them, that we're one family. Again, it points towards the south. Yeah. When you look at the earliest divinities in Kemet, they all come from the south. When you look at the way in which the people in Kemet honored the Baka people, Europeans and Eurocentric scholars mistranslate the word for Baka as dwarf, right? But this was actually somebody called Deng, which is a clan name or an ethnic name, still alive in the Sudan and in China today. They have the same source. Important thing about that is that they said that this guy is important because he knows the dances of the ancestors. Yeah. Again, south. So Bes, one of the earliest divinities, short, south. And we could go on and on and on. So although we can't say precisely where, we know the direction, the general area. And I would believe that at some point we will have some kind of rituals based upon recognizing a certain spot in Africa as the ancestral homeland of all Africans.
Okay. First of all, thank you, Prof, for this wonderful lecture. We say in Igbo that learning is good, but learning through humor is even better. And you delivered both excellently well. You deserve not just a full professorship, but even an Emmy for this. Yes, so my question is grounded in one of the seminal works of one of your countrymen, Walter Rodney, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, which you also enumerated here in so many ways. He defined development, underdevelopment, as dependence on the outsiders for your sustenance in education, for instance, in health, in culture, and even in technology. My question is, today, unfortunately, these are the areas that enable these oppressors to still continue to oppress us. They have somehow granted us what they call political independence, but that is not even in reality because they still control what happens at home. So, my question is, how can we actually get off this grip so that all these we are discussing today can actually materialize? Because as long as we continue to depend on them for sustenance, do you think we can actually make this happen?
Thanks, Brother Chinedu, for your question. Let me just say a couple of things. One is that the behaviors Rodney pointed to do not in themselves constitute underdevelopment, but they're the evidence of underdevelopment. Underdevelopment is a certain condition of the mind. And that's what we were talking about here, where we don't know who we are. It was caused by colonialism. And that's why Brother Ransom's observation about decolonization is the answer to the question you ask. But that's the objective. How we decolonize in specific spaces will differ. What I don't want to do is to give the impression that I have all the answers. I don't. And it would be rather impertinent of me to imagine that I could stay here and somebody contacts me from some part of the African world and I say, oh, here's the answer. No. We'll have to study conditions, what's going on. The principles are the same. But how do we craft a profound answer to decolonize would differ in different aspects of our people's reality. And that's why it's so important for us to do what we often say is to think global, but act local.
Absolutely.
We've always been doing that.
Reverend Joe.
Amen. I just want to stand and thank my leader, Dr. Stante, and try to encourage his heart. People that I thought voted for Trump figured out maybe they didn't. In my North Philadelphia dialect, I tell them I tried to tell you. And I understand today it's the 13th anniversary of the Institute. Amen. Maybe you might not know this, but when you go to an apartment building downtown or office building, ain't no 13th floor because they think it's superstitious. Amen. But all I want to say is this. I shorten a lot of words because I can't remember a lot of stuff. So my shortened word for this institute is keep on doing what you're doing. I'm going to call it solutions.
All right. One more. Last question. Yes.
Dr. Kimani, you give you spread a lot of good African consciousness with your lecture. It was great. When lecturers like you continue to speak of concepts created by, for instance, scholars like Sheikh Annie Joke and the marvelous Marcus Garvey, who invented Pan-Africanism, the meaning and practice of Mu'at, it just raises the spirit of young and old.
Thank you. Thank you, brother. Thanks for that encouragement.
All right. Wow. Thank you, brother. It's powerful. All right. Give him another applause. Another round of applause. Give yourself a round of applause. Absolutely. Brother, thank you so much. You've honored us here today at the Malefiketi Asante Institute. It's very powerful. I mean, in our tradition. I just don't want you to forget the next lecture will not be until April 30th. No, I'm sorry, March 30th. Thank you, George. March 30th. And we look forward to seeing all of you back here then. We want to again thank Reverend Joe for actually encouraging the Academy of Life.